podcast, How Stories Shape and Change Our Lives. Welcome back. It's been a little bit since I've been on here. Where I wanted to start was going through a portion of a chapter, and the book is called The Fire That Never Dies, Dragons of the West. For those of you who are watching this on the YouTube channel, you see the picture of the book with each episode. I wanted to explore a portion of one of the things that I had written there, which we'll get to. It's a precarious question, I think, at this moment in our history to ask. What are the collective myths that we're currently living in? And I think it's precarious for two reasons. First, there is still cultural bias against the idea of myth being something substantial or real. In other words, the idea of myth, as we have talked about before, has been relegated to old stories, or what we like to call tall tales, meaning lies or falsehoods. The word itself feels trite, I think, to our collective modern ears, because that's how we've been taught to think about myths, is no more than this. I think the other reason points us kind of in the opposite direction of where we've been going in a lot of different ways. Myth is indeed very powerful and provocative in a way that ought to humble us as we see how we both create and are created by the power of our stories and our myths. With the entire world on the precipice, or just even beyond the precipice, right in the middle of utter war and chaos, to invoke the myth is to acknowledge a very powerful presence with powerful implications. In other words, we need to tread with great care and humility and conviction if we're going to unravel and take a look at the threads of all the different stories that we're living in. The predominant myth of patriarchy and empire have dominated our world for centuries. They bring with them their own collective values, biases, ethics, morals, aims, goals. They are strictly monotheistic in every way, religiously, culturally, psychologically, etc. As such, they leave no room for, or more accurately, have banished altogether the idea of the polytheistic nature of our universe, including ourselves as individual human beings with a collective human psyche. By their nature, these myths are very rigidly exclusive, decisive, partial, and punishing. They run on an implied conviction that there is something necessarily that must be absent or purposefully left out. There are those who are in and those who are out. That is the way that it must be. Carl Jung in his writings invoked an ancient idea of which he called the syzygy. It's a weird word. It's spelled Syzygy, syzygy, which is a term that literally means yoked together. It's an idea that has been attributed to the concept of a mythological divine unity, or an idea of a wholeness which is comprised of many different parts. Two of the most powerful parts of this are the ideas of the divine feminine and the divine masculine archetypes. I believe that where these two ideas meet is at the epicenter of where our species is still reckoning with and going to war with itself to determine which one wins. And the assumption is always that one must win or conquer the other. It's an assumption, again, deeply rooted within the ethics and the values of patriarchy and empire. even as we are finally opening the door, not only to a much more diverse and multivariate expression of gender beyond the binaries of male and female, even as we are opening a wider mythic door to experience the more complex and beautiful variations of the human soul, which include, but are not exclusive to the divine feminine and the divine masculine. Nevertheless, this is the crossroads, I believe, where we keep finding ourselves stuck. And it's evident everywhere we look right now. And where we keep ourselves unable to move or grow beyond it. It is here that we continue to wage war with each other and war with ourselves. So in this episode, as I mentioned, I'm readapting and retooling a little bit a short story that I wrote in this chapter that I alluded to. And the story, I named it, I wrote it, I called it Syzygy and the Half Man. I'll leave it up to the listener to decide how poetic they think it is or not, but it has been my attempt to capture through story what I believe the nature of the conflict is itself, how the conflict works, and what the conflict is designed to keep us away from or ignorant of when it comes to the deeper truths of our own human nature. So here we go. Once upon a time, at the very beginning of time, whereby manifest became the divine principles of the unity between feminine and masculine, the Syzygy was born. At some point along the way, the half of Syzygy, the masculine part, began to wonder what it would look like to experience the world on his own, and so he tore himself away from Syzygy. And when he did this, he became a half-man. He appears as a half-man because he is only half of a divine union. He thereby proclaimed himself as emancipated from the divine unity and so claimed his own identity and confused his halfness with wholeness. He reveled in his own isness, but the price he paid for it was that he was now destined to walk around in a halfway, speak in a halfway, think about things in a halfway, and see the world in a halfway. When he tells the story of his birth, he can only tell half of the story. He only remembers his birth as his emancipation from the divine feminine half. He is meant to be rejoined with her, but he has long forgotten that she exists and so continues to pursue his own exploits in a world of his own making, a half-world. Feeling unencumbered, he wanders the earth, convincing others to join him in his halfness. For despite his newfound sense of autonomy, he still longs for some kind of connection with others. He can often appear to others as untethered in some way, master of his own fate, attractive, and so many find themselves attracted to him, and attracted to this idea that he proposes and eager even to join him and learn to live in their own halfness just as he does. He is very charismatic in his fervor to establish a half-world populated with more half-men just like him. More begin to join him in his cause, and his half-world begins to grow. Because he has rejected his wholeness, he looks to create his own version of it in his halfness as he builds his half-world, unable to see that he is only creating a half-world in his own half-image. As such, there is no acknowledgement that anything could possibly be missing in this half-world of the half-man. And should anyone dare suggest such a notion, it serves to provoke his immediate ire, and that is intolerable to him. There is no room for or need for wisdom in the half-man's half-world, because wisdom is the practice of making room for what one does not yet know, and what one has not yet learned, and what one does not have control over. Certainty, not wisdom, is the guiding principle of the half-world. In the half-man's half-world, he believes that he sees everything there is to see and knows everything that can be known already. In the half-man's half-world, keeping the peace means keeping things the way that they have always been. In the half-man's half-world, the purpose of an education is to learn how to maximize one's utility, not increase one's wisdom. The half-world of the half-man does not expand or contract. It stays still. It is static. His half-world is like a steady clock that must always run smoothly in the exact same way for all time. If a problem should occur anywhere in the good functioning of the clock-like nature of his half-world, the defective part or parts must be identified, removed, and replaced. This is how all problems are handled in the half-world of the half-man. There is no need for diagnosis, care, or cure. There is no need for context or systemic curiosity. Defective parts are simply removed and replaced. There is nothing further to know or understand about them, except that they no longer exist and have lost their usefulness. In this way, the half-man only sees half of the problem, but believing it is, again, the whole problem. Naturally, he is only capable of attending to the half of the problem he sees and is willing to acknowledge, while of course the other half goes unnoticed, untreated, neglected. If one were to be bold enough to suggest that there is something he has missed or he's refusing to acknowledge, he will become quickly agitated and even vengeful. Such a suggestion is vulgar to him and presents itself as a threat to the good and steady functioning of his clock-like half-world. There are no artists or prophets in the half-world of the half-man. These two would be considered vulgar distractions and disturbances. At best, they may be allowed to perform in the role of amusing entertainment, but nothing more. Should they indeed become disruptive in any way, the half-man must intervene. They must be silenced or removed by force if necessary. Otherwise, the half-man's half-world is in danger of falling into confusion and disarray. Along with certainty, order, and piety comprise the most important virtues and values of the half-man's half-world. Because the half-man has rejected the presence and the language of the divine feminine, he no longer speaks nor understands anyone who would speak to him in her language with her wisdom. His inability to comprehend what such people might be saying makes him extremely agitated. He commands them to be silent, not to speak, to be put back in their place, and demands strict, unquestioned obedience to the rules and logic of his own half-world, and never again upset the good functioning of it. Failure to do so may mean severe punishment, even death. For the half-man has tarried so long in his half-world, of which he spent much toil building, perfecting, and maintaining, his memory has lost completely the divine unity from whence he came. If he himself should grow sick and tired from the emptiness that has been created from the separation that he carries around, he has no remedy, for the remedy itself would come from the other half of the original unity, which has been rejected. As such, he's destined to wander around his half-world with an ever-present but vague sense that something is missing, that he is only, indeed, a half-man. His only remedy is to reject this feeling, as he has trained himself to do many, many times, and to reject many other feelings as unfortunate leftover byproducts of a glitch in the system called irrationality, which he deplores and pathologizes, working diligently to conquer and rid himself of by his sheer will and determination. Nevertheless, because he has lost all memory and all knowledge of this original unity from where he came, he is destined to walk around in despair without joy, a frustrated sense of entitlement rather than gratitude, endless busyness but no play, unquenchable lust but no love, a drive for power but no empathy, an ethic of harsh determination but no compassion, eternal debt with no jubilee. So he commits himself to walking in despair, refusing to remember that he is a half of a unity long forgotten, culpable in the ignorance of his need for belonging to an original unity, resolute in his commitment to establish a false sense of wholeness in his own halfness, with a vague but distant sense of emptiness that cannot ever be filled, satiated, satisfied, while the divine feminine remains forever exiled from his realm. One thing I believe is important to take note of here, and it is why I believe this is a story that's prescient for all human beings, because this dilemma belongs not just to men but to all human beings. The tale of the half-man is also the tale of the human ego itself. And if you are a human being, regardless of sex or gender, you have an ego. That is what makes this tale, and thousands more just like it, so archetypal. Once we develop an ego as we grow and begin to find our own sense of isness in the world, we learn to distinguish ourselves as different or separate from other selves, which, in effect, gains us the capacity to have relationship, or at least to develop relationship. First with ourselves as we work to figure out just who and what we are, and then secondly with each other. Precarious as this whole process is, it is not one that we get to choose or not choose. We're born with it. It's there by virtue of our own human nature. The temptation becomes then to look at the human ego as the enemy, as something that is bad, corrupt, or superfluous. It is not, however. And how we choose to write our stories about ourselves and our collective stories together from this point is what, in fact, makes all the difference. Because the human ego is but one of many different parts of the human psyche, regardless of its penchant for wanting to believe it's the only part that is real, or at the very least, the only part that's important. It nevertheless is a part, and a legitimate part. But if we follow the ego's biases of it being the only one that's real or the only one that's important, if we follow these biases unquestioned, then we inevitably produce the world that we are now living in. If, however, we can learn to work differently with the story of our ego split off from the whole, we get to learn, build, and practice a very different story. A story not of further separation and loneliness, but rather a story of total reconciliation. In his book Re-envisioning Psychology, James Hillman describes the process of the ego coming to terms with its place in the internal economy of the soul like this, quote, "The ego enters their realm at first as a stalker, then as their pupil, finally as their maintenance man, performing small adjustments, keeping the building in repair, the fire stoked, warming," end quote. What Hillman's talking about there is how we learn to teach our human egos to see more of the vastness of our own internal, multiple human psyches, and learn not only to see them, but to teach our egos to see their importance, to see their value, to learn how to work with them, to learn how to protect them, rather than just flat out going to war with them. This would indeed produce a very different story of us, of our human existence and cohabitation, than the one we're living in now. Can we have the courage to abandon the story of the monotheistic religions of human psychology, forever leading us to more and more individual isolation and the promise of full, untethered autonomy and dominance over others? Or are we brave enough to surrender ourselves to the more polytheistic realities of the human soul and allow ourselves to be students once more, curious once more, to learn more about this vast universal whole from which we all come and to which we all still belong? That is the question we face right now, whether we know it or not, whether we understand it or not. And how we choose to answer that question will have fateful consequences for the future of our species. That's the end of today's episode. For those of you who are still hanging with me, thanks. Thanks for coming back. There's more to come, more in the docket, more story building from this point forward, and I look forward to having all of you continue to join me, come along on that journey. And again, hopefully as you're listening to this, it's allowing you or encouraging you to start getting more curious about your own stories and the multiplicity of your own individual soul or psyche, all the different parts of you that want to express themselves in different ways. My continued encouragement to all of you to cultivate the courage for real, and it does take courage, and curiosity. I think those two things, courage and curiosity, to take a look at that. So we'll be continuing to do that together. Thanks again. Blessings to all of you. Please take good care of yourselves. It's a harsh world we're living in right now. We need to take care of ourselves, and we need each other. Just give yourselves a lot of permission, room, and space to do that, so that somewhere on this earth love abounds. All right. Take care, everyone. Till next time.